All right, today we are going deep. We're doing a full forensic analysis of the arguments wrapped around a single verse of the Quran. This isn't just about the verse itself, though. It's about a classic, powerful debate that pits two fundamental ideas against each other: human reason versus divine revelation. So the big question is, where does one end and the other begin? Let's get into it. And here it is, Surah Maryam, verse 53. On the surface, it seems like a straightforward statement about Moses and his brother Aaron. But for classical scholars, this verse became a launchpad for one of theology's biggest, most challenging questions. How do we actually prove something is true?
So, here's our roadmap for this deep dive. First, we're going to lay out the core dilemma. Then, we'll look at the argument from reason before putting it under the microscope in a cross-examination. After that, we'll unpack the authority of Scripture. And finally, we'll see how it all clicks together for the final proofs and judgment.
Okay, let's start with the fundamental conflict here. This whole entire argument really hinges on this tension between two different ways of knowing something, two kinds of proof that, can sometimes feel like they're in a head-on collision.
Now, to really get this debate, you have to know these two key Arabic terms. First, on the left, you've got aql. Think of this as your intellect, your reason, the kind of proof you can figure out for yourself. And on the right, you have naql. This is the transmitted stuff, the knowledge that comes to us directly from Scripture and divine revelation. This slide really helps clarify that contrast, doesn't it? Aql, or reason, is kind of like something that grows from its own roots. It's independent. But then you look at naql, Scripture, and it's totally dependent on its source. It has to be transmitted perfectly to be valid. The whole intellectual drama we're exploring happens right there, in the space between that independent proof and that transmitted proof. So, with that conflict now established, we can get into the core argument itself. Because the text we're analyzing doesn't just leave these two ideas fighting each other. No, it actually proposes a thesis for how they're supposed to work together. Now, the crucial point here isn't that one is better than the other. The thesis is that they both have very specific jobs to do. Reason, your aql, gets you to those big foundational truths. But for anything related to the unseen world, you absolutely require Scripture, naql. The entire intellectual challenge, then, is figuring out exactly where that boundary line is drawn. And this is where the analysis gets really interesting. The text doesn't just state its thesis and move on. It immediately puts it on trial. It anticipates all the logical objections and addresses them head-on, almost like a prosecutor in a courtroom cross-examination. So this leads us to the first major challenge, and it's a powerful one, right? If our intellect is a valid, God-given tool for discovering truth, then why do we need anything else? Why not just rely on pure, unadulterated logic for, everything? The text's response to this is incredibly nuanced. It argues that reason is the foundation. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. Your intellect can get you to massive truths, like, hey, this incredibly complex universe must have a creator. But then reason hits a wall. It can't tell you the specifics of the afterlife, right? That's where Scripture comes in, not to replace reason, but to build right on top of it. Which, of course, brings us to the next, even more critical objection. What happens when these two seem to clash? When Scripture says one thing, but your own reason is screaming that it's impossible? Which one wins that fight? The resolution here is just brilliant. The argument is that a true contradiction is actually impossible. If authentic Scripture and sound reason seem to be at odds, the problem isn't with them, it's with us. It means either our logic is flawed somewhere or our interpretation of the text is off. They're meant to be like the two wings of a bird. You absolutely need both, and they have to work in perfect harmony to achieve flight. So, having established this idea of harmony, the analysis then pivots. It turns to define the specific authority and role of Scripture, the naql. What is its unique, non-negotiable contribution to our knowledge? And this argument isn't just abstract philosophy floating in space. To prove its point, the text grounds its claims in other verses from the Qur'an itself. It creates this web of internal evidence, showing that this very distinction between reason and revelation is a core principle baked into the Scripture itself. So this is the key role of Scripture. Its primary purpose is to give us knowledge of the ghaib, the unseen. It reveals things like the nature of God, the details of the afterlife, or the specifics of divine law. These are truths that are, by their very definition, beyond the reach of our own logic. And now we come to the final section. This is where all these different threads we've been following get woven together into a single, powerful, logical chain that connects absolutely everything we've talked about. Let's walk through this logical chain together. Step 1. Your reason, your aql, concludes that a just creator would provide some kind of guidance, which leads you to the necessity of prophecy. Step 2. That prophecy is then confirmed through proofs you can actually observe, like miracles. Step 3. Once a prophet is confirmed as authentic, you then accept the naql, the scriptural knowledge they transmit, which leads to the final step 4. Because this entire process began with reason, accepting the scripture they bring becomes the only logical conclusion. And this is the final judgment of the entire argument. Belief in something as abstract as the Day of Judgment isn't presented as some blind leap of faith that goes against reason. No. Instead, it's framed as the ultimate, rational consequence of a process that began with reason. So we end right back where we started, but with a much, much deeper map of the territory. This forensic analysis has shown us one classical attempt to draw that very tricky line between our own minds and a divine text. It doesn't give us a simple answer, but it leaves all of us with that essential question. In our own lives, where do we draw that line between reason and revelation?